Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I don't often touch on modern history as it's being made, but occasionally we do dive into that topic, and I believe that this is one of those times that warrants that. I think it's impossible to turn on the TV, and I don't watch a lot of 24-hour news cycle just because it's just very repetitive, and it's all very kind of biased one way or the other depending on who you're watching, and it's hard to sift through what's true and what's just talking points and what people want you to hear. And I do, though, think it is really important for us to talk about the history that is unfolding in front of our eyes with this conflict between Israel and Iran. So I thought it would be worth talking about, and I saw that my friend Mr. Terry had taken a look a few days ago at a video from the channel Warfronts. And it's one of the many Simon Whistler channels in the catalog that he has of channels that he narrates. I don't know that we've ever taken a look at one before, and I did not watch Mr. Terry's video because I wanted to come at this fresh. And I honestly am just going to say up front, I don't consider myself in any way, shape, or form an expert on this topic, only what I've been studying on my own. And kind of trying to figure out what's not being said, and just some observations that I've made about what's being said, what's not being said, who are saying those things, and what we might be able to glean from this as we watch history unfold before our eyes. And we don't know how it's all going to turn out yet. So I'll put the link in the description so you can check out the original content as well as everything else that Warfronts has to offer. This video is from 4 days ago, and it's called The Israel-Iran War Has Begun. Obviously, a lot has happened in 4 days, but let's talk about it. Let's dive in.
Israel and Iran are at war. At the time of writing, it hasn't been formalized, but after what happened in the pre-dawn hours of June the 13th, it's as good as done.
Yeah, he makes a good point there when he says it hasn't been formalized, but that's the nature of warfare today, isn't it? It looks different than it did, say, 100 years ago when nations made declarations of war, and then it was this massive effort. It looks very different than that now, and that goes all the way back to things like the Korean conflict, which wasn't necessarily a declared war between the belligerent nations. Neither was Vietnam, and neither was any of the modern conflicts. The United States did not declare war on Afghanistan or on Iraq when we went into those conflicts. And it also, right, so far isn't involving ground troops. This is a very modern war with missiles being fired and air power being used and drones being used. And this is what we're going to see more and more of.
Israel has launched a massive sequence of airstrikes, sabotage, and targeted assassination across Iran, targeting the country's nuclear facilities, its military leadership, and its ballistic missiles. Iran has made clear its intent to retaliate in kind. The United States stands ready to respond with overwhelming force, and the time for negotiation has conclusively passed. It's the showdown that the Middle East has been building toward for decades, and it's finally here. Israel and Iran.
And I'll be honest, when this all first broke a few days ago, and actually the way I first found out about it was I saw a tweet from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that, hey, this happened, the U.S. wasn't involved. That was the first I saw of it, even before, like, I didn't see anything on the news about it yet at that point. But, you know, this all happened last year where we saw some of this go on between Israel and Iran, but it fizzled out pretty quickly. This time it seems to be continuing, and it may even yet escalate.
0 seconds to midnight. Here's what you need to know in advance of what comes next. Now, before we begin, we've got to issue a very important caveat here. Everything that we discussed today is accurate to the best of our ability as of 9 o'clock in the morning, local time in Tehran on Friday, June the 13th. We have worked to produce and publish this episode as quickly as possible. Indeed.
That's impressive. I mean, that was right after it happened, and this is already several days old.
This afternoon, I wasn't even supposed to be in the office this morning, but they're at war. But we can practically guarantee that the situation will have evolved further by the time that you see this episode. Rest assured that we will be back to cover major developments in due time. Indeed, I'm back from holiday next week. Oh, with that out of the way, let's begin. The explosions began at about 3 o'clock in the morning, again, local time in Tehran. In Jerusalem, the attack was dubbed Operation Rising Lion. Among the most important targets for Israel was a key uranium enrichment facility called Natanz, where Iran has worked to prepare enough uranium at the proper enrichment levels that it could create weapons-grade material on short notice. Images circulating on social media in the immediate aftermath of Israel's first wave of strikes showed Natanz in flames, with smoke billowing high into the sky. According to the chief of Iran's Atomic Energy Agency, Natanz is now severely damaged. But Natanz was far from Israel's only target.
Right.
According to sources from within Israel's defense apparatus, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, hit a number of sites relating to Iran's nuclear program, as well as its missile launch capabilities and its command and control infrastructure.
So if you're looking at this from Israel's perspective, obviously you have one shot at getting the jump on Iran with this. So you're going to try to target as much as you can, as fast as you can, when they're kind of lulled into a false sense of security, which from all appearances, that's what they did. And the U.S. and others may have been involved in that part, in communicating the idea that nothing was imminent. There were some talks that were supposed to go on, I believe that weekend in the Middle East between the United States and Iran. This ongoing discussion that's been going on for years now with deals and deals that were on and then off, and about does the international community allow Iran to have nuclear power for civilian use, for electricity, versus weaponized use? And of course, there are a number of countries that have nuclear weapons, and we've done videos on that. And you know, the easy thing would be to just say, well, it's hypocritical of those countries to say we can have nukes, but you can't. But for a long time now, that's been kind of the ongoing thing. North Korea, Iraq with the WMDs, things like that. And so this has been an ongoing concern. And of course, you, on top of that, have Iran's involvement with what is seen by many in that region as being destabilizing influences through groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and their support of those things. Iran is not a favorite of many of the Arab countries. Iran's not an Arab country. They are Muslim, but they are not Arab. They're Persian. And so a lot of the Arab Muslim countries aren't necessarily friends with Iran. And that's why I think, for example, we're seeing Israel, which is also not a great friend to Arab countries, being allowed to do this without a lot of threats or retaliation by other nations. In fact, they've probably used the airspace of countries like Jordan and Iraq. And we saw last year, and I think it's happened this year, that even Jordan has helped defend Israel against the attacks, the retaliatory attacks by Iran. And that just goes to show you how very complicated the relationships are in this region.
A number of hits were reported across the capital city of Tehran, including at 6 separate military bases, 2 secure command posts, and residential units where important Iranian figures lived. The headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard Corps was reported to be in flames by the time the first strike ended, with some accounts indicating that a crisis meeting between senior leaders was underway when the facility was hit. Iran declared a nationwide state of emergency in response, although by the time it went into effect, a second wave of strikes was already on its way. After a few hours, Israeli sources reported that the IDF had logged around 300 successful hits, with that number only expected to rise.
And inevitably, along with all of this, there's going to be the propaganda war that takes place on both sides. And what are both sides going to want to build up as much as possible? Civilian casualties. And civilian casualties are inevitable when you're dealing with this kind of warfare. Even with precision airstrikes, inevitably something's going to go wrong. And civilian casualties, unfortunately, are a part of war. They're actually a much less part of war now than they were 100 years ago or more. Where, I mean, look at the firebombing of Dresden, for example. U.S. and British bombers killed tens of thousands of Germans in one night. That stuff happens, and I'm not making light of it. It's the reality. But your side's going to want to play up the civilian casualties. Look at the evil enemy who's killing our people. They're not hitting military targets, they're hitting civilian targets. Both sides are going to play that up while playing up their own side, only focusing on military targets.
According to a wide range of sources speaking anonymously to the global press, Israel's first wave of attacks went far beyond just airstrikes. Israeli intelligence elements linked to the Mossad organization moved into action.
And Mossad, if you're American, think CIA. Only Mossad is much more willing to do things that our CIA would never admit to doing. even though our CIA has done some of those things. And so they're the ones who lay the groundwork for this. They're the ones with agents on the ground who are able to figure out where these folks are, and they're going to do a decapitation strike, which the U.S. did something similar at the start of the war in Iraq back in 2003, where we tried to kind of decapitate the leadership, so to speak.
And all across the country, especially in urban areas, carrying out a range of acts of sabotage and targeted assassination. Now, the specifics of those operations, not yet known as of the time of writing, but already it is clear that the cultivation of assets and the preparation on the ground for an attack of this scale must have taken years.
Absolutely true. I think we are seeing the result of years of work that was done to prepare for this moment. And who knows how long Israel's been prepared for this moment, and it may be that they were just waiting for the right moment to pull it off, or it may be that they just now got in position to where everything was ready to go.
In addition to high-level officials, Mossad targeted Iran's air defense systems as well as its ballistic missiles and launch equipment. Israeli intelligence sources have indicated that the nation also worked to create a false sense of security for Iran.
And I think we were involved in that,
attack, including a vacation for Benjamin Netanyahu and an upcoming wedding for his son. Just as important as the locations that Israel hit are the individuals that Israel has eliminated. Among those who have been confirmed dead are Hussein Salami, the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Mohammad Bagheri, chief of staff of the entire Iranian military.
This is stuff that goes back forever in history, right? There's always been a focus on taking out leadership as a way to create confusion and disarray and weakness in your enemy. During the American Revolution, there was a lot made of the fact that American riflemen at times would target British officers. And how much that really happened is hard to really determine, but it certainly was a factor where you have leadership being taken out, and the command and control crisis that creates. I can think of an example where it wasn't necessarily intentional, but the result was confusion. At the Battle of Antietam, I did a video about one of the brigades at the Battle of Antietam, and there was this coordinated attack being made by the Union on the morning of September 17th, 1862. And you had several brigades marching side by side going into the fight. And one of the brigades loses their brigade commander. And the way things worked at the time is that if a brigade commander was no longer able to function, then the senior regimental commander took his place. Senior regimental commander has to be contacted at his regiment. Hey, you're now in charge of the brigade. Now he takes over the brigade. Now his next in command has to take over the regiment. And that may mean kind of a domino effect. And that causes time to be taken where you're focusing on getting people into leadership roles before you can continue. And so there's always been that element of warfare.
Also among the dead, Gholam Ali Rashid, commander of the central headquarters of the Iranian General Staff, and Ali Shamkhani, the senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, who was entrusted to be Iran's chief negotiator in working toward a new nuclear deal with the United States. In totality, Israel is believed to have eliminated a large portion of Iran's top military leadership, if not most or even all of the nation's most important military decision makers.
And the other thing that's important about this, and one of the things you've noticed in the days since this began, and I noticed it big time when I listened to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first public address I watched of him concerning these events, he spoke directly to the people of Iran. We know that there are a lot of people, especially young people in Iran, who are not happy with the leadership of that country. And I think there is an element to this, and I'm sure Mossad is involved as well, that Israel's very much hoping that they can get the people of Iran to rise up and overthrow their government and establish a more democratic form of government that's going to be let's say, willing to play ball with the other powers in the region instead of working against them. That's going to be a little more friendly, so to speak. And of course, that's been something that's been going on for decades. The U.S. CIA was involved all the way back in the 50s with overthrowing Iranian leadership. I think that's a big component to this, is that they're hoping that they can do that they can overthrow the government. And in their minds, I think, and probably in U.S. minds and a lot of other people's minds, it's better if the Iranian people overthrow the Ayatollah rather than him being taken out specifically with one of these strikes, because then that might turn the people against you.
just as important is the list of people who've survived thus far.
Yeah.
Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, President Masoud Pezeshkian, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and Minister of Defense Aziz Nasirzadeh.
I'm not so certain that's not intentional, that those people weren't targeted, or maybe they just couldn't get to them because they didn't know their whereabouts.
None of them are believed to have been targeted by this wave of Israeli strikes, but that could change in the future. As of the time of writing, Iran is only engaged in a limited retaliation, with the IDF reporting that Iran has launched a number of kamikaze drones toward Israel. While the reason for the lack
And since then, there have been ballistic missiles, which Iran has a lot of ballistic missiles, and so that's one of their primary weapons they're going to be able to use.
of larger immediate response hasn't been confirmed outright, is hardly a secret. Israel's attack appears to have been quite clearly intended to destroy Iran's command and control infrastructure, and Israel now appears to have succeeded. Iran's supreme leader has already appointed a few replacement figures, including a new chief of staff of the armed forces, but that's only one small part of what Iran will need to do in the coming days.
Right.
With the magnitude and scope of what Israel has achieved, it's likely that Iran's surviving military leaders will need time before they can even figure out who's supposed to be in charge now. Iranian MiG-29 fighter jets did scramble to respond, but it's unclear whether or not any air-to-air engagements actually took place. If they did, then this may well be the day that the American-made F-35 fighter,
Right.
specifically the customized version that Israel flies, gets its first test in head-to-head aerial combat.
And this is a great point he makes, is that we see this throughout history, where we see examples of weapons of war that are created and are like the next big thing, and then there's an opportunity for them to get tested. The dreadnoughts and even the pre-dreadnoughts, when you have this new generation of warship at the turn of the century into the beginning of the 1900s, we get to see them really used for the first time in the Russo-Japanese War. And so that's going to be a little bit of a preview before we end up with the big war, with World War I. And I'm not suggesting that this is a preview of a bigger war to come, though it certainly could be. But we've been hearing about these fifth-generation fighters for a while now. A lot was made of that in the Tom Cruise movie a couple years ago. But now we're seeing examples of them being used in combat. And Israel does get a lot of its weapons of war from the United States and our allies. So now we get to see what the F-35 can do. And people are going to learn from this. They're going to learn what works and what doesn't. You can test these things all you want, but until they're actually in combat scenarios, you're not really going to learn what you've got on your hands.
Reports to that effect have not yet emerged as of yet. With the Middle East on a knife's edge, we'll wait for another day to explain the ins and outs of how we got here. The most important context, however, is to do with the ongoing nuclear negotiations between Iran and the United States. Over the last few months, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come out as a staunch opponent of the talks, arguing that Iran cannot be trusted to engage in a nuclear deal of any sort, and it's a foolhardy endeavor to even try and come to terms. Those concerns have been validated by recent reports that found that Iran is rapidly increasing its stockpiles of low-enriched uranium.
Now, it's fair to say we've been hearing this for years, and of course the strikes that Israel launched last year, how much did that set them back? But when we say, they could be weeks away from weaponized uranium that they can use to make a bomb, in enough quantities to make a bomb, we've heard that before, and it doesn't mean it wasn't true before, and maybe they got turned back somehow. So all of this is predicated on how true is the information that we're hearing. If that is the case, and obviously Israel believes it's the case, and it seems like maybe other countries do too, one of the things that has been key for me in all of this is what people aren't saying. And what you haven't had happen is a lot of Western democracies coming out and condemning Israel for this. They really haven't. In fact, I was just reading, I think it was yesterday, one of the members of the government in, I think part of the leadership, it might have even been, it was the chancellor of Germany, basically came out and said, Israel's doing the dirty work for all of us. Basically, I mean, that's about as close as you're going to get to saying, we signed off on this, we agree with this, we're glad Israel's doing it because we couldn't do it. So we're glad they are, and I think that's probably the attitude of the Trump administration too, is that, hey, we weren't involved, we didn't do this, but we're kind of glad that Israel did. And I feel like that's what's happening because there's a lot of silence on the part of Western democracies concerning all of this.
towards Iran a dangerous breakout capability, and experts now estimate that within a span of weeks, Iran could enrich enough of its existing stocks to weapons grade, which it could use to build 10 nuclear warheads. It would take longer for Iran to build and assemble a delivery mechanism for them, but that would likely be a matter of just months.
I mean, they've got ICBMs. We've seen them use ICBMs, so you just got to throw one of those warheads on one that's modified to use for the purpose.
According to Israel, however, even that is an undercount. Speaking to the global press as strikes were already underway, Israeli officials alleged that Iran had enough uranium to produce 15 nuclear bombs. Not only that, but they alleged the bombs were already being assembled and that Iran was just days away from final nuclear breakthrough. Now, we do have to emphasize here that those claims have not been validated independently,
right,
but as of now, they're the explanation that Israeli sources have provided for the strike.
And we do know that Israel's got Mossad sources on the ground, and I'm sure that the U.S. has got the CIA in there in some way, shape, or form, and others do as well. But we'll never know, I don't think, 100% for sure, short of someone waving the evidence in front of our faces. And one of the other caveats to all of this is that Iran does have some of their most important technology relating to all of this in places that Israel can't get at. Israel, it's been made a lot of in the news the last few days, doesn't have the means to deliver those giant bunker-busting bombs that can get down hundreds of feet through concrete. Only the United States has that technology, and only the United States has the delivery technology through like B-52s to be able to do that. And I don't know if it's B-52s or if we're using the B-1 bombers for that. I'm not up on my planes, but basically the U.S. is the one that would have to do that to get at some of those really deep underground, under concrete spots that Iran probably has this stuff because they know what Israel's capable of.
Since the start of the nuclear negotiations, the United States under Donald Trump has worked to hold Israel in check, making sure that Israel didn't carry out a strike several months ago and demanding a chance to establish a diplomatic settlement. As recently as 2 weeks ago, Washington was urging Jerusalem to be patient and avoid launching strikes, citing the fact that Iran was at that time still participating actively in the negotiating process.
And one interesting thing about all this, of course, is that, you know, we talk about Jerusalem as being like the way we say Washington. When we talk about the government of Israel, they say Jerusalem. But you notice that most of these strikes by Iran are going at Tel Aviv. Well, Tel Aviv is like the major city in Israel. And of course, Jerusalem is not just recognized as the capital of the state of Israel. It's also part of Palestine, and it's recognized as a holy city by Muslims and Jews and Christians alike. And so they're not going to indiscriminately launch missiles at Jerusalem for many of those reasons.
Now, with Trump seeming to grow more skeptical about Iran's willingness to work with the US, it's unclear that he tried to prevent Netanyahu from taking action. Trump and Netanyahu spoke by phone as recently as Monday, but few details about the content of that call have been disclosed to the public. Iran has insisted that it retain the ability to enrich uranium on its own territory, a clear non-starter for Israel, and efforts to work out a compromise don't appear to have had any success. Prior to Israel's wave of attacks, the US and Iran were scheduled to meet in the nation of Oman this Sunday in a sixth-round, last-ditch attempt to establish a nuclear settlement.
And the question, of course, is how much of that meeting happening played into the timing of Israel's strikes. Was the meeting a ruse to lull Iran into a false sense of security? Did Israel decide they needed to strike before an agreement was reached? How did that all go down? Those are questions we still have.
According to US officials, America still intends to be present for those talks as scheduled, although it's not clear that Iran will have any desire to
No,
come
it didn't
to the
happen.
table. Not only has the nation's lead negotiator been killed, but it's not even clear that Iran has a nuclear program to negotiate over anymore.
No, they still do.
Nor is it clear that Iran has any interest in pursuing an off-ramp after what's just happened all across the country. Right now, it's impossible to say for sure how this conflict will end.
Yeah.
But we can say with some confidence that it will not be ending quickly. According to Benjamin Netanyahu himself, Operation Rising Lion is expected to persist for several days at least.
And we know now it's been still going on, and it's escalated in some ways. And the real question right now is this the beginning stage of something much more violent and much more widespread in the region or even beyond? Because remember, Iran does have support from the North Koreas and the Russias of the world. But how much can Russia really do while they're still embroiled in everything that's going on in Ukraine? Do these seemingly disconnected events end up becoming part of something larger? That's the fear right now, is how do you contain this and get it to kind of, put the cat back in the bag, or does it break out and does this get really, really ugly really, really fast for a whole lot more people?
Other Israeli sources suggest that Jerusalem is ready to keep things going for weeks or even longer if need be. Israel's leadership was shifted to secure locations within hours of the start of the strikes, and the nation has closed its airspace and placed all of its hospitals on notice for a large-scale emergency. Israeli news channels are reporting that the nation's leaders expect Iran to unleash a massive, coordinated drone and missile assault, possibly lasting for days or even weeks. Iran is believed to possess around 2,000 heavy-yield ballistic missiles, as well as many tens of thousands of unmanned kamikaze drones and at least a few thousand long-range cruise missiles. It is critically important to understand here that just hitting Iran really hard doesn't necessarily interrupt Iran's ability to launch a massive counterattack. And
right.
Iran has spent years planning and distributing its aerial projectiles and launch systems to ensure that it could retaliate even if its command and control infrastructure was decapitated. And it's equally vital to understand that although Israeli air defenses are robust, no air defense system is infallible anywhere in the world.
No, and we've seen that. And even though you have nations like Jordan helping out with the defense, if thousands of cruise missiles are launched, some of them are going to get through. No matter how great your defense is, you cannot possibly take on all of them. You're going to be overwhelmed.
Air defenses can only shoot down as many incoming projectiles as they have interceptors, and with the sheer volume that Iran could launch its weapons, it's a distinct possibility that Israeli or even American air defenses could be overwhelmed,
right.
leading to
and we know American air defenses are there.
But for Israel's part, the Netanyahu government appears entirely committed to the cause. This was not a mere warning shot by Israel. Jerusalem did have the option to launch a more limited attack, maybe destroy some air defense systems or drop inert, non-exploding munitions at the locations of Iran's senior leadership in order to coerce Iran into accepting more favorable terms at the meeting in Amman this weekend. Instead, Israel went for the throat in a series of strikes that aren't even somewhat debatable in their intent. And Israel fully understands that this will demand retribution. As for the role of the United States, Israel's most important...
Whenever you do this stuff, part of the planning, in addition to the intelligence and getting your resources in place and the diplomacy that's going on and the counterintelligence and everything, you're also wargaming this out. You're saying, okay, what does a response look like? Based on our best case scenario of what we eliminate in the first hours of Iran's air defenses and of their retaliatory capabilities, what are we looking at in response? And then you try to plan it out, but no plan survives contact with the enemy, so you can only plan it out so far. Now both sides are in an unknown situation based on everything that has happened.
Important international backer, that remains to be seen. On the one hand, there's a decent argument to be made that Israel's actions may have been intended as a slap in the face to America's Trump administration, with whom Netanyahu is known to be...
I think that it's less of that than we may have initially thought. There's been some indications. Donald Trump's not always known for kind of thinking through every word that he speaks. He's much more carefree with his words. And for example, when he said recently, I think it was in the last couple of days, that we have complete air supremacy in the region, I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue or if that was a little glimpse into the fact that we may be more involved in this than we're letting on.
On less than ideal terms for reasons that we won't be getting into today. For Israel to carry out such a devastating series of strikes, when by all accounts the US plan to meet with Iranian officials this weekend, could be read as an outright dismissal of America's priorities and strategic leadership. On the other hand, if Washington tacitly signed off on the attack or privately endorsed Israel's plans, then it's equally fair to say that the nation might benefit from looking as if it's been caught off guard. But the most troubling possibility is that Israel may intend to lure the United States into a larger conflict, even against its own will, by launching such a large assault that Iran is almost guaranteed to retaliate at large scale. Quoting National Security reporter John Hudson on X, A US official says this attack will provoke a significant Iranian response that the Israelis will then ask the United States to help counter, despite the fact that it just blew up the delicate US diplomatic talks.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that. I was actually just scrolling through just now while this was playing, looking at some of the latest things that are coming out. I mean, we saw US Vice President J.D. Vance do a long post yesterday on social media, and we've seen this from other people, and we've seen things that Donald Trump has said, that it seems like they're throwing stuff out there and laying the groundwork for U.S. being more directly and overtly involved in all of this. How much, I don't know, but they're throwing that stuff out there because I think they want to see how people respond. Are people going to come out violently opposed to it? Are people going to kind of support it? How much does what's happening domestically with protests and with immigration and customs enforcement and all of that, how much does that play into the Trump administration wanting to deflect by focusing on a foreign conflict? These are all questions we have to have right now about how much the U.S. gets involved. And if the U.S. gets more directly involved, do we see China and Russia and others become more directly involved as well?
End quote. That request would be a hard one for Washington to refuse, and even more so if American assets are targeted by Iran alongside the nation of Israel. American military might would go a very long way in supporting Israel's objectives, although Israel might be most interested in one specific military asset. And that would be the Ju-57, better known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 5,000-pound bunker buster that's designed to burrow into the ground and destroy Iran's most hardened nuclear facilities, where Israel's best munitions still can't touch. American warplanes are stationed around the Middle East in such great numbers that they could lay waste to Tehran if they get the go-ahead.
Right.
For now, we'll have to leave it at that. But as this...
Yeah, okay. We're still in the middle of this, so I think we're going to probably be talking more about it as we go along. I'm going to try to do a live stream this weekend, and I'm sure this will be a topic that we discuss in the live stream. Let me know your thoughts. Hard to say how this is gonna shake out. Fingers crossed and prayers up. It doesn't escalate, and we can find peace. Whatever side you're on, whoever you think's the good guy, the bad guy, whatever you think's right and wrong, I think the one thing hopefully we can all agree on is that we want peace and we don't want people to die. So hopefully that's how this ends up. Thanks for watching.